Most women have no idea what truly happens in the soul of a man when she finally walks away. She thinks he's indifferent, she thinks he won. But in reality, something ancient inside him begins to tremble, something buried under years of bravado, distraction, and inherited silence. He may not cry, he may not chase, he may not even speak, but the psyche begins to fracture, silently, internally, like a storm rolling in across a field of brittle glass. Because her absence is not just the end of a relationship, it is the unmasking of his unconscious. You see, the feminine presence carries more than warmth or beauty. She carries reflection. She is the mirror in which he first sees what he has denied in himself. And when she leaves, that mirror shatters, and with it goes the illusion that he could avoid his own depths forever. Her departure becomes the doorway, unwanted, unwelcome yet necessary, into the dark forest of his psyche, where the ego meets its reckoning and the shadow steps forward. Most men don't know this is happening. They just feel the gnawing in their chest, the sudden disinterest in pleasures, the haunting images of her eyes, not as temptation, but as truth, because somewhere deep inside they know. Her leaving wasn't punishment, it was prophecy. She became the final echo of something he never dared confront, the parts of himself he handed to her, expecting her to carry them like burdens disguised as affection. The feminine archetype is not here to make a man feel comfortable. She is here to awaken him. And awakening, as Carl Jung warned, does not come without pain. When she walks, it is not just the loss of touch or conversation. It is the soul withdrawing its invitation for him to become whole. It is the divine feminine stepping back, forcing the masculine to turn inward, alone, without the distraction of her presence. And in that solitude, the shadows rise. He sees now the control he mistook for strength. The silence he called stoicism but was really fear. The pride he wore like armor but used to keep vulnerability away. He sees that the woman he lost was not a possession but a reflection of everything he longed for but refused to become. She was the sacred fire he basked in without learning to carry his own flame. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt her leave not just the room, but your psyche? Her footsteps echoing louder than her words ever did? That's not just heartbreak. That's initiation. That's what the ancient myths warned of. The fall from Eden, the loss of the goddess, the descent into Hades. It's what Jung called individuation, and what the Stoics called the purification of the soul. A man is not made whole by winning her back. He is made whole by confronting the chaos her absence reveals. And here's the storm. The ego resists this with everything it has. It blames her, labels her cold, dramatic, irrational. It tells stories of how he was right, how she was too much, too intense, too emotional. But beneath those words is the tremble of a boy who never learned how to sit with pain. A boy who was taught that emotion is weakness, that women are confusing, and that losing is for the lesser man. So instead of going inward, he runs. Into work, into conquest, into numbing, into anyone who doesn't require depth. But the soul remembers. The psyche holds the imprint of the feminine he lost. Not her body, but her essence. The way she saw through him. The way her silence asked questions his words couldn't answer. The way she didn't need him, and in that not needing, challenged every belief he had about worth. It is in this inner chaos that he is given the chance to awaken. Not all men take it. Many drown in blame or distraction. But a few, those who dare to look deeper, begin to see her departure as medicine. Bitter, potent, unrequested, but sacred. They realize she did not break them. She revealed where they were already broken. And in that revelation, they are left with only one path forward, to face themselves. There is a moment in every man's life, whether he speaks of it or not, when he sits alone, staring into the silence she left behind. Not just the silence of her voice, but of her presence. The silence that lingers in the bed, in the routine, in the very fabric of his inner world. It is not empty. It is filled with everything he tried not to feel when she was near. Her departure unearths it all, and here begins the unraveling. At first, it looks like confusion. Why does the world feel hollow, even though he thought he wanted his freedom? Why do other women seem dull reflections? Why does the taste of victory, if he won the argument, if he pushed her away, now turn to ash in his mouth? That is not regret. It is recognition. Because in truth, he did not lose her. He lost access to the part of himself she awakened. In Jungian terms, she was not just a lover, she was the anima, the inner feminine, the soul's whisper, the intuitive voice. She arrived not merely to share affection, but to illuminate the imbalance in his psyche. The very energy that made her so magnetic to him was the energy he had exiled from himself. Her warmth, her chaos, her emotional depth, they were the compass he had long since silenced. And now, without her, he has no choice but to face what he tried to outsource to her care. The feminine does not rescue the masculine. She reveals where he must rescue himself. That is the storm. Not thunder in the sky, but the collapse of inner scaffolding. He can no longer pretend that performance equals love, that dominance equals power, that emotional withdrawal equals maturity. She touched the raw, unmet hunger beneath all of it, the longing to be seen, truly seen, without needing to earn it. And now that she's gone, that hunger screams louder than ever before. Some men run from this point. They find another woman quickly, not to love her, but to mute the ache. They repeat old cycles, building walls made of charm, intellect, or stoic distance. But those who are brave, those who are truly ready, do something far more terrifying. They sit with the wreckage, they stop performing, they allow the questions to rise. Why did her truth threaten me? Why did her needs feel like burdens? Why did I fear being truly known? This is where the alchemy begins. Because for a man to truly evolve, he must let the ego die 1,000 deaths. He must let go of the myth that strength means never bending. He must grieve not just her, but the illusions he built to avoid becoming vulnerable. He must descend into the underworld, where identity shatters and only essence remains. And it hurts. It burns. It leaves him stripped of titles and trophies. He realizes that power without presence is empty, that success without connection is sterile, that desire without intimacy is a wound looking for a distraction. He remembers moments when she simply looked at him, not with need, but with knowing, and how he turned away from it because it felt too much like being exposed. But now that exposure is all he wants. He craves that rawness, that mirror, that sacred chaos she carried, not because he wants to possess her again, but because he wants to find the part of himself that could stand in that fire and not flinch. This is the invitation the feminine extends, even in absence. And make no mistake, it is an invitation few men accept. It is far easier to blame, to harden, to return to the surface. But those who answer the call emerge changed. They become men who no longer fear emotion, men who can hold space without controlling it, men who can love without ownership, men who no longer need to conquer the feminine because they have finally integrated her within. And when that happens, the storm subsides, not because he forgot her, but because he became the man who could finally understand her. The man who doesn't just want her body, her attention, her softness, but who honors her as a force, a mirror, a sacred current that called him to wholeness. He begins to thank the silence, because in it, he met himself. He doesn't say it aloud, but something in him knows. The woman he lost was never really his to begin with. She was a guest sent by the soul, a messenger dressed in beauty, a sacred disruptor. Her walking away wasn't betrayal, it was alignment. Her absence isn't abandonment, it is the withdrawal of a mirror no longer willing to reflect a man who refuses to see. In her leaving, she became the teacher he never asked for. The man who once clung to control now stands at the edge of something ancient and unspoken. His usual defenses, the sarcasm, the pride, the need to always be right, fall flat in the face of this internal reckoning. What once earned him applause now earns him silence. What once made him feel superior now feels like armor rusted to his skin. Because something inside of him has shifted. The ego, once so loud, begins to whisper, unsure of its place. The shadow, once denied, begins to rise. And it brings with it everything he tried to bury. The mother wound. The boy who was told to man up before he knew how to feel. The aching loneliness of always being needed but never known. The hollow victories. The women he used as mirrors for validation. The way he learned to take rather than receive. The way he mistook attention for intimacy. He sees it now, not as shame, but as signal. He realizes that to become whole, he must reclaim all the parts of himself he once feared. Because wholeness is not perfection. It is integration. Jung taught that a man cannot find peace until he meets his shadow and learns to dance with it, until he brings light to the darkest corners of his psyche, not to destroy them, but to understand them. That is what she triggered. That is the storm she left behind, not chaos, but confrontation. a confrontation with everything he refused to feel until her absence forced him to sit with it. This is not about her anymore. This is about him. The man who once chased significance now craves stillness. The man who once feared surrender now longs for softness, not from another, but from within. He begins to realize that presence is not passive. It is power. That true masculinity is not domination. It is devotion to truth, to vulnerability, to the fierce and beautiful task of becoming whole. And so he stops searching for her in other women. He stops trying to replace what was never meant to be possessed. He begins instead to rebuild, quietly, privately, not for approval, but for alignment. Not to win her back, but to meet himself for the first time without the mask, without the act, without the noise. He reads the books he once ignored. He listens to music that makes him feel again. He speaks less, but means more. He allows his grief to move through him, not as weakness, but as wisdom. He lets the ache shape him, not into a version she would return for, but into the man he was always meant to become. And here's the sacred irony. It is in this space, this still, inward, soul-stirring space, that he begins to sense her again, not physically, not romantically, but energetically, archetypally, not as her, the person, but as her, the divine feminine, the anima, the essence of what she embodied. He no longer needs her to return. He no longer needs closure, because now he carries what she awakened inside of him. He doesn't chase it in others. He protects it within himself. This is where the old self begins to dissolve. The man who relied on performance, on conquest, on external validation begins to die. And in his place, something quieter, stronger, more rooted takes form. A man who can hold space for the storm without needing to stop it. A man who can listen without fixing, feel without fleeing, love without losing himself, because now he knows what he wanted from her, he had to become for himself. That's the paradox she brought. That's the gift wrapped in departure. She wasn't there to complete him. She was there to wake him. And once awakened, he no longer seeks her as salvation. He sees her as catalyst, and he blesses the pain because it turned him toward his soul. By now, something elemental has shifted in him. Not in grand gestures or bold declarations, but in the subtle, seismic shifts that only the soul can perceive. His footsteps are slower, more deliberate, his gaze softer, less searching. He walks the same streets, but something in him no longer looks outward with the desperation of a man trying to fill a hole with borrowed light. He's begun to see the sacredness in his solitude. To feel, not just understand, that healing is not an event. It's a return to himself. The man who once feared emotional weight now holds space for it like a warrior tending a fire. He no longer flinches from pain, no longer dismisses the tremble in his chest, no longer numbs the pull of memory. He has learned that masculinity without depth is an empty drum, loud but hollow. And now, because of her absence, he's found his rhythm again, not in dominance, but in dignity. She taught him this by not staying. In her walking away, she removed the illusion that love means rescue, that a woman's presence should erase a man's emptiness. No, she left because she could no longer be the ground he refused to stand on for himself. Because her love was never meant to patch his wounds, it was meant to reveal them. And once revealed, he had two choices: retreat back into comfort or evolve. He chose to evolve. And so now, he dreams differently. He listens to silence as if it's a sermon. He sits with the part of himself that once begged for validation, and instead of shaming it, he cradles it. Not as weakness, but as origin, as the place where everything begins again. The boy who was never allowed to cry now becomes the man who can feel deeply without apology. And in that softness, he discovers a strength no one ever taught him, a strength that doesn't shout, doesn't conquer, doesn't perform. It simply is. This is the man the feminine longs for, not because he is perfect, but because he is real. And when another woman appears, not to replace her, but to reflect where he's arrived, he does not cling. He does not project. He does not seek salvation. He brings presence. He brings honesty. He brings the sacred calm of a man who has walked through fire and come out forged, not charred. He no longer fears losing her, because he no longer fears losing himself. The power she once held over his heart has transformed into a reverence for all that he has become in her absence. This is not a happy ending. It is something far deeper. It is a rebirth. The man who emerged is not the same man who once stood silently as she walked away. That man was fragmented, hungry, and blind to his own depth. But the man now standing here is whole, not because she returned, but because he did. He returned to his breath, to his truth, to the wounded inner child he once abandoned. He became his own anchor. And somewhere, if she still thinks of him, perhaps she feels it. Not as longing, not as regret, but as recognition. A knowing that her leaving was never in vain, that her absence was the very pressure that shaped his becoming. Because some women don't stay to love you, they leave to awaken you. Not every muse is meant to stay. Some arrive only to light the match that burns away everything false. And when that flame dies down, when the smoke clears, what remains is not ashes, but essence. He no longer mourns her, he honors her, as the one who turned his gaze inward, as the one who said no so he could meet his own yes, as the mirror that cracked so his soul could surface. He sees now that she did not walk away from him, she walked back to herself, and in doing so, she led him to do the same. And this is where the true storm passes, not because the wind's calm, but because he stops resisting the rain. He allows it to fall, to soak the illusions, to cleanse the debris. He doesn't run for shelter anymore. He stands in it, drenched in memory, in grief, in truth. And slowly the waters wash him back to what he had forgotten long before she ever entered his life, that he was never meant to be defined by what he could earn, dominate, or possess. He was meant to remember who he is. Without all of that, he was meant to become. The deeper currents of his soul begin to rise, not as drama, not as need, but as quiet authority. He no longer looks for power outside himself. It's in the way he breathes now, the way he listens, not to respond, but to understand, the way he notices the quiet spaces in conversation and no longer rushes to fill them. The man he is now is not afraid of silence, because he's made peace with the silence inside. And when thoughts of her return, and they do, because real connection never fully disappears, they no longer feel like sharp edges. They feel like sacred reminders. That love, when it is real, does not disappear. It evolves and it teaches. She taught him boundaries by walking. She taught him truth by refusing to stay quiet. She taught him love by refusing to give it when it was not being met with the same soulfulness. And in her absence, he learned that the feminine is not here to soothe the unhealed masculine. She is here to call it into consciousness. That was her power. That is every woman's power when she remembers who she is. The anima does not come to flatter the man. She comes to challenge him to awaken. And now, because he answered that challenge, not with aggression, not with manipulation, but with stillness, he carries her imprint with grace. He does not resent her boundaries. He respects them. He does not long for ownership. He longs for alignment. He does not chase what is gone. He embraces what it gave. And in this embrace, something holy occurs. He begins to feel himself as a whole being, no longer looking for his missing half. He no longer idealizes the woman who left. He sees her clearly, with both gratitude and release. She was never his savior. She was his mirror. And now the real work begins, not to get her back, but to walk with integrity forward, to build a life not of emotional compensation, but of conscious creation. He begins to build, not to impress, but to express. He surrounds himself with people who speak soul, not performance. He cultivates depth, not distraction. He no longer needs to prove his worth. He embodies it. And when love comes again, as it surely will, he will not approach it with the trembling hands of a boy begging not to be abandoned. He will approach it as a man, present, powerful, grounded in truth, not seeking to be chosen, but ready to choose. Because he has learned the rarest lesson of all, that the feminine leaves not to punish, but to protect her own soul. And that in her absence, the masculine is offered a sacred path, not of blame, but of becoming. This is the man reborn in the fire she lit. He walks not ahead of her, not behind her, but beside her or alone. Either way, he is whole. He no longer fears her power. He honors it. He no longer fears his own depth. He lives in it. And the storm that once raged through his soul now rests like still water, clear, reflective, eternal. He thanks the silence. He thanks the ache. He thanks the woman who walked, not because she left, but because in leaving she gave him the most precious thing of all, himself. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses. Thank you for joining us on this emotionally charged and psychologically rich journey. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred a memory, sparked a realization, or touched a truth you've long kept silent, Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced an awakening after someone walked away? Or witnessed a man transform after losing a woman who once mirrored his soul? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like this video if you found value in it, and subscribe to the channel for more deep, soul-centered content on psychology, conscious love, and emotional transformation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We don't just tell stories, we awaken souls.